Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. And another heavyweight news mashup video today, and apologies in advance, I'm a little bit croaky and spluttery with a head cold, but starting with the WBC, which is intending to talk to Tyson Fury and his promoters about their next step moves. So Mauricio Sulaiman, he says, we are addressing every weight category separately. The WBC is in the process of contacting every champion to assess their current status and plans. The WBC will be looking into each category and will review each case and rule taking into consideration and the variables that have to do with each case. That is Mauricio Sulaiman talking to Sky Sports. So Tyson Fury, currently as it stands, he does owe Deontay Wilder a third fight that is in place through contractual obligations. They're looking at the end of 2020 possibly, or even 2021. They want to have that fight, stage it with a crowd to maximize revenue. Obviously boxing, money makes the world go round in the boxing sphere. But in the periphery of the situation with the WBC, you have Dillian Whyte, who is the WBC mandatory challenger, as ruled by the WBC, who is due to get his shot by February 2021. So there becomes an issue. One, you have Whyte probably going to be butting up quite close to whenever the Fury and Wilder 3 fight is to be held. But then you have the other situation of an undisputed fight off in the background as well. Dillian Whyte may in fact get his shot before that actually can occur, but the timing, and especially with the pandemic, everything's being pushed out. You know, there hasn't really been any boxing for the best part of 3 or 4 months now. So obviously the WBC is going to look at this pretty much unprecedented situation, bearing in mind boxing doesn't really have an off-season. Sure, it might go a little bit quiet at different times of the year, but there's boxing throughout the calendar year. So Sulaiman and the WBC going to talk to Fury and Bob Arum, and I'll come to a couple of Arum comments soon, but there could be scope for the WBC to push out that WBC mandatory shot. And obviously Dillian Whyte, sensing that he may get passed over or pushed back, this is why he's recently launched some legal proceedings against the WBC. With that in mind, he wants to have his shot as early as humanly possible, and he doesn't want to be cast aside. But Bob Arum, Fury's co-promoter, he says these organisations will be cognizant that the mandatories must be pushed into the future because fighters for at least 3 months had no ability to fight. Then after those 3 months, the fights will be without spectators. We will be talking to the organisations to eliminate mandatories or to postpone them for at least 1 year. I'm sick and tired of being forced with my marquee fighters to fight meaningless fights against mandatories that mean nothing. That's Bob Arum. So he's laid out a case there that there's been no boxing for 3 months. There would have to be another 3 months without fans. So that's 6 months, yet he wants mandatories to be pushed back for at least a year. So my maths on that one doesn't seem to add up to whatever Bob Arum's talking about. So pushing back mandatories for a full year, that might, for the mandatories, for them, would be quite something, and I'm sure they wouldn't want that at all. And I have to take some of what Arum says with a pinch of salt, because, he's saying that the Dillian Whyte mandatory is a meaningless fight. But he has one of his fighters, Kubrat Pulev, who's going to be fighting Anthony Joshua. And that's probably out of all the mandatories that are going to be called in the next year or so, the one that fans would like to see the least. So Arum, I'm sure if the shoe was on the other foot, if he was the one behind Oleksander Uysk, Kubrat Pulev was waiting behind an Uysk title shot against Joshua, he would be saying, and crying from the rooftops that the mandatories and their positions had to be protected. So some of this you have to take with a grain of salt, but the WBC could well push things back, and this is why Whyte has moved so swiftly, knowing that potentially his chance at a WBC title shot could be pushed back even further. What do you make of it all? And just on the IBF, bearing in mind that Anthony Joshua has a shot against Kubrat Pulev, which is yet to be rescheduled. Originally, it would have been held this month in June 2020. So when it's going to be rescheduled for, unclear. Sort of like the Fury Wilder 3 fight needs to have fans to make money. That's part of what they're looking for. But the IBF has said, given the current circumstances, we are being flexible. It's difficult to put a firm date on mandatory obligations at the moment. Everyone is working hard to get things going with boxing again, and hopefully everything will be on track soon. And in terms of these mandatory obligations that have to be fulfilled, it's not so bad if you're the one that is the next guy, the next cab off the rank, because you know that fight will come, it just has to be scheduled. It's guys like Uysk and Dillian Whyte that are really sort of probably sweating bullets right now about what's going to happen. Usyk team has obviously made some noise as well. But in terms of these fights, because Joshua and Pulev, that would have actually been held in June this month, June 2020. It may not be till the end of the year, November, December, something like that. And I guess people will have different ideas about what's fair in terms of the rescheduling, because when you look at it, they could have those fights in the next month or two, but they just have to have them without fans. And for them, they don't want to do that because it's about money. But for the fan, for you and I just kind of want to see those fights and move on to whatever's next after that. Kind of feels like some of these big fights are being stalled just purely because of money reasons. But, I guess, it's prize fighting. Everyone has a vested interest who's part of, those promotions and those events, so they want to maximize the revenue. It's boxing all over after all. But hopefully those fights are held sooner rather than later, because the leniency of, say, the IBF, they don't reschedule that at some point, it's going to wear thin. So if they don't hold that by the end of the year, then all of a sudden you start to get to a bit more of a murky situation. The 1-0 prospect David Adeleye has been added to Frank Warren's first card back, which is going to be on July 10th. So in this post from Queensbury, which Adeleye has used on his social media, British boxing is back, different venue, different date, no crowd, but the same result. And Frank Warren has also referenced Adeleye, saying after a successful debut in December and then sparring Gypsy King 101 to help him prepare for Wilder, David Adeleye returns to our July 10 show at BT Sport. Given he is a 1-0 prospect, I'm not expecting much in the way of an opponent. He needs a bit of activity, and he might be on some of the, I believe Frank Warren is hoping to have 4 or 5 shows before the end of the year, or in the next few months at least. Adeleye, you might see him on 2 or 3 of those. The manager for Top Rank's Sonny Conto has shot down any suggestion that a Guido Vianello fight could happen anytime soon. Vianello's manager Sam Jones had been suggesting that matchup for early 2021, wanting to have both Top Rank prospects square off against each other, possibly in Philadelphia or potentially in Italy. But David McWhorter, speaking to Mike Coppinger, said, "They're clowns. No upside to Vianello at all. What you see now is what he will be in 5 years or 10, an awkward stiff." So clearly not interested in the fight, but I would just sort of those statements there from David McWhorter, Sonny Conto's manager, if Vianello is such an easy touch, why wouldn't you want to take that fight? It would be seen as a decent prospect level win. At the moment, Conto's 6-0 and Vianello 7-0. It's kind of early in their prospect phase. If one of them took a loss, it wouldn't be too damaging. And if it is such an easy fight, why not take it, get the win, get a bit of shine? Vianello had a decent career as an amateur, and out of the two, he may have a little bit more profile at this point than Conto. But yeah, it's really sort of shutting that down quite firmly. And I did ask Sam Jones on Twitter his response to that, and he said, "Nothing much to say. All we said is we're happy for Guido, who is still a prospect, to fight Conto for first quarter of 2021, which I think would be a great fight and would end in a Vianello KO win." McWhorter has responded, calling us clowns. All he needed to say was, "No thanks, we don't want that fight," but by saying that has just made them all look scared. Good luck to Conto. It's probably for the best he doesn't fight Guido, as he'd beat the absolute brakes off him. So that's Sam Jones, the manager for Guido Vianello. And that's quite an interesting fight. I actually thought that Vianello versus Conto, it's, got the makings and all the ingredients for a good fight. And if both guys had 2 or 3 more fights this year on some of these top-ranked cards that have been coming back, by the time they would fight, they'd be around 10-0. And if one of them took a loss, it wouldn't necessarily be too damaging. Vianello at the moment is 26, I believe, and Conto's, 23, 24. So I don't think it would be the end, of the road for either. And for me, I look at that fight and think that could, be a really, really fun fight. Both do have skills and both do have a bit of pop. And at the moment, Vianello probably does have a bit more profile than Conto, but it does strike me as a bit odd that McWhorter had described Vianello being an awkward stiff and effectively saying he was nothing. Make of it what you will. And rounding up this heavyweight news mashup video, Lucas Browne is taking gym workout facials to a whole new level. Check this out.